Well, good morning, and welcome back. It's exciting to see so many familiar faces from last year and new faces too, and to hear the stories that were shared with me when you guys came in. Again, it's mind-blowing to see so many people here on a Saturday morning, and I can't wait to tell my students about this on Monday, of how people are turning out to learn about the history of Wheeling, on a Saturday morning like this. So what I wanted to do to begin class here is kind of talk about my plan for today, and that's to talk about the frontier era of Wheeling, and it's been written and talked about a lot. So what I want to do is share a very unique story about a couple different objects with you in regards to the frontier era. And then coming up, what I was thinking about with October 4th, so these will be the first Saturday of every month, on October 4th, I thought it might be appropriate to do a little haunted history and maybe talk about some historic cemeteries in Ohio County, and I might even mix that in with a little transportation history too. But I'm thinking about talking about cemeteries and haunted history, and then the next class will be November 1st. And this is kind of a project that I've really been thinking about for a long time, and it's been inspired by this group, but it's just going to be an introduction, but a history of Ohio County schools, and talk about our school system, and just all the different schools that you've been a part of, Wheeling Park High School. And what you're looking at there is a picture from a 1977 Wheeling Park High School yearbook. So that would have been the first yearbook from Wheeling Park. And funny story, so our department chair, Rick Marsh, he is also one of our assistant football coaches. So this summer they're having football practice at Wheeling Island Stadium, and someone just randomly came in and they had that yearbook, and they were like, hey, can you get this yearbook to the guy that teaches those history classes? And so Rick was like, yeah, I know him, I can take care of this. So he brought the yearbook in, I just sat it on my desk and I was looking at it, flipping through it, and then kids would be like, this past week, what's that? And they started looking at it, and they've been looking at it for really since school started, the last 8 or so days. They've been looking at that book randomly, and they absolutely love it. So that really kind of inspired me to, do a class that kind of begins a little bit of history with the Ohio County schools. And what we're kind of thinking about doing is I've talked to our school store, and we have a lot of just great things in our school store that students have made in our vocational department that are for sale, and just maybe do a little bit of a tour of Wheeling Park High School after that class if you're interested. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about down the road if you're wondering what some of the future topics might be. Okay? And I wanted to also share this. I want to make sure I cover just events that are happening in history or with other historical groups in Wheeling. And if you're at this today, there's a really good chance you might want to attend this tomorrow. On Sunday, the Friends of Wheeling are going to be sponsoring a Mount Wood Cemetery tour. And it's going to begin at 1 o'clock, so 1 to 5. The last tour will start at 4. But they're going to have people portraying different people buried at the cemetery that have somehow contributed to local Wheeling history. And you may have seen these before at Greenwood Cemetery, but this is just a really unique thing that we do here in Wheeling to sponsor Wheeling history, but also to get people learning about those cemeteries too. So if you're interested in this is again tomorrow. And probably one of the most important things to do is to take note that if you've ever been to Mount Wood Cemetery or you're familiar with it, there is really no parking there. And so what will be happening is they will have you guys parking basically right across from Stone Plaza, and then they will shuttle people up to the cemetery and then back and forth. So I have a flyer that I'll set out at the end that has this information, and then also if you want to learn more about the people that will be portrayed on Sunday, that is also going to be available for you guys too. So that's a big event coming up tomorrow. And then an event that happened this past weekend was the Fort Henry Days. And one of the things that I always have my students do for extra credit is just go up to the Fort Henry Days and check it out, walk around, but I want them to interact with one of the reenactors. And so kids love doing this, all right? And even kids that you really wouldn't think would be into history, they like going to an event like this, and they like having their picture taken, and they like going up with their friends. And to be quite honest, you know, again, ever since they went last Labor Day weekend, Tuesday through Friday of this past week, at the beginning of class, at the end of class, I've had a conversation with multiple kids about the Fort Henry days and what they saw. Are there other festivals like this? Talking about, you know, the reenactors, and so it's been an ongoing conversation all week. One of my students went to the Fort Henry days, and then they went to the Mound at Moundsville. Like, they just couldn't get enough of history and wanted to make a little day out of it, so they went down to Moundsville. And then one of the funniest pictures is up at the top there. There's a group there, and Alyssa is one of my students this year, but when she sent me the photo, I open it up, I see Alyssa, but then I'm like, didn't these other kids graduate? They graduated last year, found out she was going, they were in town from college, and they went with her, and they thought it was hilarious that I had to do a little double take there to make sure, like, wait a minute, like, I thought you guys wasn't expecting to see former students. And so, again, like, that's what this is all about. That's what teaching's all about, is making these connections with students and having them get out there in the community and participate a little bit. And again, it's funny when you find out that former students are still going back to it. So, the other thing I wanted to do at the beginning here, real quick, was sort of pay homage to the town of Triadelphia and what they've endured over the summer with the devastating flooding. And one of the things that I talk about in my class is how did Triadelphia get its name? What are the origins of that? And for me, like, my address is Triadelphia, but I was not affected by the flooding. But to me, like, Triadelphia is home. So, you know, when I tell people I'm from Wheeling, I always throw in, like, Triadelphia. To me, that's the community that I'm part of. And so, I wanted to just kind of, you know, give a little shout out to them and everything that they've been through. And, you know, for me, like, I went to school at Middle Creek. I rode the school bus every single day through Triadelphia. You know, even though I don't know all the people there, I drive through there all the time. You know, so it's home. Actually, the part-time job that I've had since 2002 that I'll actually be going to after this at noon, you know, is in Triadelphia. So it's a huge part of me. And one of the things that I cover with my students again is how did Triadelphia get its name? It's not a very common place name that you ever really hear of anywhere else. In fact, like, if you're from Triadelphia and you've ever been on the phone with someone and you have to say, like, your town, and you tell that person Triadelphia, and they're like, can you spell that? Because again, it's just not very common. So, how did Triadelphia get its name? It was named for 3 friends that were killed by a band of Indians. And I use this information based off this historical marker there that sits outside of the community center. And so, I guess I should have quizzed you guys on this, but my students always make the connection that, you know, Tri 3, they're like, okay, Mr. Stanton, it's 3 something, but does anyone know what Delphia means in Greek, what it refers to? Friend or brother, okay? So then they make the connection with, oh, Philadelphia, brotherly love. And so the historical marker in Triadelphia says that, you know, this person settled there, they had a blockhouse in 1780, and then, like, him, and then 2 of his friends or, you know, brothers were killed. Now, what's interesting is this era of history is also kind of tricky to study because people didn't document things as well or write things down because they were trying to survive. But I always explain to my students, if you really look into this, also, like, some people will say that it was named for actually 3 brothers. So their father had claimed the land that is now Triadelphia, and that it was actually 3 brothers. So I'm really not sure which story is 100% true. I definitely like telling this one to my students because they're just amazed at how dangerous it was to live here during this time period. And then this kind of ties into the frontier history that I'll kind of be talking about for the rest of the class here. But if you have never been to one of these classes before, what I do with my students every single day is a wheeling warm-up. So there is always just that fact of the day that we go over. And that becomes extremely handy because there's so much history to talk about. So I love giving them these quick little bits of information. And so as I thought about this class in frontier history and what to discuss, there's a lot. There's a lot of topics that you could cover. There's McCulloch's Leap, there's Betty Zane's Run, there's the construction of Fort Henry, the purpose of Fort Henry, just all the dangers that settlers encountered during this time period. There's the Native American culture that you could discuss. But really what I wanted to do for this class, I thought, I'm gonna talk about an object. Okay, so that object is going to be this cabin, and this was built by the Zane family, or Ebenezer Zane, one of the three brothers who founded Wheeling, in 1769. Now the Zane family, they actually came to the New World, believe it or not, in 1672. So it would be the, if I'm doing all this correctly, it would be the great-grandson that eventually makes his way to settle in what is Wheeling. And this was, probably one of the first, if not the first structure that was built by settlers in 1769. And so there's numerous images and some even photographs of what it looked like throughout the years, but these are postcard images of the cabin. So, it was a simple structure that served as a blockhouse, so shelter, but also protection. And many of you, of course, are familiar with the story of Betty Zane, when during the Second Battle of Fort Henry, the fort was under siege, and she made a gunpowder run to this cabin to take gunpowder back to the fort, which was running low, to save the day. So this cabin really stood the test of time throughout Wheeling history until 1908, when it was demolished. And as the rest of Wheeling was growing, this cabin was in an alley near Stone and Thomas, and it was just, I guess, in the way of progress. But even then, people knew that this was a historic location, and we should do something to preserve it. And there were even rumors of people trying to buy the cabin to dismantle it and then sell it to the state of West Virginia and make a huge profit off of this piece of history. But what would end up happening is someone would acquire the property, and again, they wanted to build a new brick building in this place. And so this is a photograph of the cabin shortly before it would be dismantled. And what's kind of unique about this photo is the Ohio County Library zoomed in on this, and that square there right here with the 3 on it, that is an opening for Wheeling Park, or advertising the opening season of Wheeling Park on, I believe, May the 3rd. During that particular season. So if you were here for classes last year, this would have been when Anton Raymond was operating it as, amusement park and beer garden. But yeah, here's a photo of the cabin. Of course, now someone had put wood siding over the cabin and everything since Ebenezer had it built. And then here's a photograph of the cabin being dismantled. And for my students, they don't understand where anything is in downtown Wheeling, because they don't understand maps, okay? They can't put it in GPS, and they don't want to mess with it. So, but when I talk about the cabin, they get very curious. They're like, so wait a minute, where was this, okay? And so here's another picture of it being dismantled here, which again is kind of funny, because you wonder what was going on this day. I mean, it's, in the process of being torn down, but someone is photographing this and people are just kind of, surrounding the camera to get in the picture there. And then this is an image of the building that would replace the cabin. Now, for a long time, most of you would know this is the shoe hospital in this particular alley, but that's what would be in there for a long time. But this is basically what replaced that spot. And then again, so I have to explain to my students, where is this? Like, what does this look like today? And so what I'm looking at is the alley where the cabin was located. And then Fort Henry would have been, approximately where the Capitol Music Hall is-ish, like in that area. So the cabin was just a short distance away from Fort Henry. And then again, this is actually that alley where, approximately the cabin would have stood. So, again, this is what's kind of fascinates students, that, wow, like this is how much Wheeling has changed. From the settlement to all the vegetation that had to be cleared and everything for the Zanes and other families to establish here, to now it's streets and brick buildings and everything. So yeah, that's the approximate location of where the cabin was. Now, probably about 10, 12 years ago, I feel like I say this a lot, but I was buying antiques from someone, and this guy says, hey, you might be interested in this. I have a gavel, okay, that was made from timbers of the original Zane cabin. And so I thought, okay, I've got to see that, all right? So I go and look at it, and I don't really know what to expect, and he's like, it has documentation. So I look at it, and I'm thinking, okay, this looks like it could be maybe made from the timbers of it. And I don't know about you, but that's like the most magnificent looking tag I've ever seen. I wasn't expecting anything that fancy. I mean, it's typed up, it's pasted on like a piece of cardboard, it has this amazing little rope tied to it. It looks so official, okay? So I'm like, if this guy's trying to scam me, then he's doing a pretty good job. This looks like it could be old. So here's a zoom in of what the tag says, but you know, it was made by this guy Thomas. You know, it says that timbers of the cabin, talks about the gunpowder run. And then this gavel was given to Betty Braden, who was related to Betty Zane. And, you know, this was in 1940. And it's signed and everything. So I'm like, well, okay, yeah, sure, I'll buy that. What can it hurt? So I would use this in class as an example of this could be, okay, made from timbers of the cabin. But it's also kind of like a little lesson of history. I mean, how do you know? Like, how do you really know if that's the case? And so let me make sure I got my, make sure I got my pictures lined up right here. So what I want to do is read something from the Ohio County Library's website that I would find a few years after getting this. And they would tear down, again, the cabin in 1908. And then for years, those timbers were stored in North Wheeling, all right? Well, let me find my, I want to read here. So this would be from the Wheeling newspaper, Saturday, May 18th, 1946. The building that those logs were stored in North Wheeling was slated to be demolished, okay? And so that made newspaper headlines that, hey, those logs are still in there, what are we going to do with them? Well, some of you may recognize this name, but Andrew Christian Hess bought the logs to make sure that they would be preserved. And the article goes on to talk about how, you know, they're historic and they're Zane's cabin, it's where Betty Zane ran to and everything. And so Andrew Hess, he bought the logs and then turned them over to Ogilvy Park. And they describe the timbers as being about 18 inches wide, 4 inches thick, and are excellently preserved, being of walnut. Just what disposition of them will be made at the park is not determined at this time, but they will likely be utilized in a special Betty Zane room for one of the buildings in Ogilvy's blueprints for the future. There are too few of the Zane logs to reconstruct a complete cabin. During the years, though, some of the cabin's original logs were used for making gavels for various organizations. So I found that, you know, someone had transcribed that article from the library's website, and so I remember when I found that, you know, I pulled that picture up and I'm like, guys, wait till you hear this. There's actually documentation that this could be true. And they roll their eyes and are like, you are way too excited about this gavel. But, you know, I mean, it lines up that this all makes sense, but what I wonder is how many gavels were made. Not all gavels have a tag on them that, you know, signify that's, you know, that's what they are. So if anyone happens to have a gavel, it kind of looks maybe something like that. You might want to maybe check into the background of it. But to me, like, this is what history is all about. There are so many people that have written about this era, from, again, the McCulloch's Leap and Betty Zane's run and, you know, the Zane family and Fort Henry itself. I thought, I don't even know where to start to teach that information in, you know, such a short time period. But I thought this story might be something that maybe like some of you weren't familiar with and you might find interesting. And again, like, this is what history is all about. Trying to preserve those stories, those objects, and this is just one example of how that was done. Now, as I was kind of planning what to talk about, I started thinking, you know, over time, like, the city of Wheeling has really loved that pioneer spirit. And the name, like Fort Henry or McCulloch or Zane, has appeared in numerous different things and objects. And so this would be the warm-up that I would just, provide with my students. So 1908, 1946, that's when the logs are given to Ogilvy. And this is where my knowledge is kind of lacking, but I have a bunch of students that work at Ogilvy, and they tell me that the logs are used in different things in Wilson Lodge. Does anyone know 100% sure where in Wilson Lodge, or how exactly? The fireplace mantle? Okay, that's the main thing that my students have told me, and there must be some little documentation there, but that's mainly how Ogilvy has used them that I know of. And then there's those gavels swirling around. But yeah, this would be the warm-up that I share with my students, and this warm-up I'm going to add on to with them, because again, that like pioneer spirit name, whether it's Fort Henry or whether it's Zane or McCulloch, has appeared in so many different things since then. It's just something that we've really held on to. And so the other question I get is, the Zanes, what happened to them? A quick little summary of that would be Ebenezer Zane would establish Wheeling, but he would also establish Bridgeport, and then I'm sure all of you have heard of Zanesville, and you may have wondered, is that the same connection? But basically, he would get a bunch of government contracts to build roads, and Zane's Trace would be the road that connects Zanesville, Lancaster, Chillicothe, and then all the way down to Maysville, Kentucky. So that's kind of like the quick version of whatever happened to the Zanes, or what did Ebenezer do after things settled down on the frontier. But the name Fort Henry, or that pioneer spirit, where else can it be found? Well, one of those places is the Fort Henry Club. So the exclusive men's club, for a long time men's club that was in Wheeling, that established in 1890, named after that pioneer spirit. And this is something that, like, I think is interesting, again, is how the name has lived on in different things. So Fort Henry, and then this was, the green thing there, you can't read it because the way the photo is, but it's a matchbook cover from the Fort Henry Club that was given to me by one of our classmates here, Mr. Holloway. I know I saw him walk in, but that lives next to the gavel that's in the background between all the stuff that I have crammed into a glass cabinet. But yeah, so the Fort Henry Club, taken from this pioneer spirit that lived on with that club's name. This is how McCulloch's Leap was used throughout history, and this is just, to me, again, fascinating. This is a brochure from 1969 that was put out weekly, it looks like, to promote what was happening in Wheeling, like just different events and things like that. But this is 1969, and I would love to meet the person that designed this, because they thought, we're going to get people interested by using the McCulloch's Leap graphic of leap into Wheeling, okay? And this is before, like, graphic design and computers. Like, how did they do that? How did they come up with that? I just think it's so cool. So you may have seen those brochures, because they're floating around out there, but I thought that was a great graphic. And then at Park, one of the things that I started last year was the Fort Henry Club for students that are interested in history. And last year, the flyer that I made for the Fort Henry Club, I borrowed from this person's idea. And then this year's graphic will be run into Wheeling history to try to, again, motivate students to maybe think about what is the Fort Henry Club all about, and to join it. But that is something that, I have a small group of students. We meet basically about once every 3 weeks, and we just kind of go over different things going on in Wheeling history, or different events or things like that. The funny thing is, though, is as students were looking at that 1977 yearbook, this girl said, we should have a club where we just look at old yearbooks. And I thought, the Fort Henry Club, that's like, we can do that. So, this is just a place at Wheeling Park where, again, if you're interested in really any kind of history, we'll take you. But there are so many students that find local history fascinating, because it's just right in their backyard. They can drive down the road and quickly see the things that we're talking about and discussing. So yeah, that leap into Wheeling history, though, that image of McCulloch's Leap, people were familiar with that story, and then it's used for advertising. I just think it's really cool. Fort Henry transmission. after Fort Henry. So again, like, just again, using that historical name for a business. Last year, I brought in a clipboard from the Weimer Meatpacking Company. And so, again, if for you guys that are familiar with Weimer's, they had the Fort Henry brand. So again, like using that name to brand something, keeping that history alive. Wheeling is just very proud of that. So, that is something that, see those artifacts floating around out there, but again, Fort Henry. How many of you guys remember the Fort Henry Motel in Elm Grove? I mean, how many of you guys have thought of the Fort Henry Motel since it was demolished, all right? But I can vaguely remember, again, driving through Elm Grove and going home through Triadelphia in that hotel, and just being kind of fascinated by it, because you knew it was an older hotel, but that goes back to the heyday of the National Road and the increase of automobile traffic. But there's an ashtray, Fort Henry Motel, that someone probably stole out of there or something. But that's the fanciest ashtray ever. I mean, it's got Fort Henry Motel, it's got McAuliffe's Leap, it's got an image of the fort that's probably really inaccurate, didn't look like that. But again, like naming a hotel after Fort Henry, after that pioneer spirit, lives on. And then this might be probably the coolest thing to me. It's Betty Zane Quick Action Brush Cleaner. Okay. One of the things that I really like collecting is bottles, or just really anything from Wheeling. But the Betty Zane Chemical Company, they named it after her. Imagine like there's a group of people sitting around a table, they're going to start a chemical company, and someone says Betty Zane Chemical Company, and they're like, yes, that's what's going to sell brush cleaner. But yeah, no idea anything else about this company. It was in Wheeling, West Virginia, Betty Zane Chemical Company. But here's the other thing, Betty Zane, the Zanes, at one time in history, when you were learning about American history, Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, Betty Zane, like her name was mentioned, with those same, pioneer, legends that kids learned about. So I imagine, like when that bottle, because there's a date on that, I think it's 1945, that was a common historical name that a lot of people would have been familiar about. Kids learned about Betty Zane's famous gunpowder run. So that just cracks me up every time I look at it, of how, that name is used. And so that kind of leads me to how I'm going to wrap things up here, is I'm actually going to do it with another gavel, different gavel, okay? So our shop teacher here teaches carpentry, Will Myers. He's down, so I'm on the third floor is where my classroom is at. So I'm on the top floor of the school, and Will Myers' vocational class is there on the ground level. So one day, it's in between classes, I'm out in the hallway, and I see Mr. Myers, and I'm like, we're all like, are you lost? Like, what are you doing up here, okay? And he's like, I got something for you, and he's holding this gavel. And I thought, well, what is that? And he goes, you're gonna want this. And so on here, there's this nice little brass tag, and it says that this gavel was constructed from timbers of the original city-county building. I thought, okay. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking of the gavel, from Zane's cabinet. Does anyone know who made this? So it's from timbers of, that building. And I think it's like the trim that was in all the offices and stuff like that is where this one came from. But does anyone know who made these gavels? What institution? McKinley, okay? So McKinley, back then, was the vocational school for Ohio County. So, if you wanted to learn a trade, if you wanted to learn auto mechanics or car... And you took your core classes. The whole time, okay. And they had their own yearbooks. I mean, that's a whole history by itself when you look into McKinley. And you guys will help me with that because I don't know a whole lot about it. You guys lived through that and knew people, or some of you went to McKinley. But yeah, so that was one of the projects for those students at McKinley, is to make gavels from those timbers. Now, the reason I was really excited about this, because, I mean, it's neat and everything, but also, one of the things that I acquired in one of my travels of picking up antiques is this box, okay? Now, if you walk by this, you're like, this is a piece of junk. This thing's thrown away. There's a hole in it, there's nothing in it. But on the back of this, it says McKinley Vocational High School, made from lumber from the state capitol building, Wheeling, West Virginia. So not only were gavels made out of that lumber, but also this. And what this was is, and again, a former McKinley student had to explain this to me, but this was one of the projects that they would make. But a clock would go in here. So like an alarm clock would go in there, and it was just kind of like a little house for the alarm clock. But, and on here, there's someone's name that says WIT, they wrote on there. But again, like, this is kind of, to me, history coming full circle. I got two gavels made from the ruins of historic buildings that were in Wheeling. There's Zane's Cabin, and then there's the City County building. So this was built in 1876, and of course it's demolished, which a lot of people will say this was a huge mistake to tear something like this down. But this also served as the state capitol building when Wheeling was the capital of West Virginia. And then there's a picture of the old McKinley Vocational School there at the top. But as I was kind of planning this talk, you know, I was always going to talk about the Frontier Post. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Zanes, and then I remembered the gavel, and then I just kind of had this light bulb moment. I got another gavel that's made from a historic building. And again, like, to me, this is what history is about, the stories that these objects tell. And that's all I have. That's where I'll conclude everything. So if you guys have questions or anything, we can do that. Yeah.
Where was this city building?
So tell me if I'm wrong, but pretty much the same exact spot as our current city-county building, same spot. So they tore that down, and they tore that down in 53 or 4. It was in the 1950s when that was demolished. Yeah.
Where was McKinley?
Where was McKinley? 17th Street, East Wheeling. Again, you guys know more than I do because I barely remember that building. Okay. Karen will have another mic here, and then I'm going to hop down here too. Is any other questions or anything? Yeah.
Given the significance of Fort Henry and the Wheeling area, and Ohio River being the absolute western frontier at one time in the 1700s, I'm a little mystified why the fort isn't rebuilt or redone. There's almost vacant land right beside it.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
I know, that's, you know, my students, again, one of the things they ask is, why? Like, why is it more there? I don't know. It's a great question. It's something that people have been debating for years, but you have Fort Steuben, for example. They have the space to reconstruct that. Yeah, and then, like, you reminded me about something, too, just in regards to Zane's Cabin. Like, to think about this area during that time period in 1769, you had Pittsburgh, and then this, and that was it, as far as civilization. So to come here, like the Zanes did, you had to be pretty brave. You know, most people would have rather just stayed on the East Coast where it was relatively safer. They were a very wealthy family too. They did not have to do what they did to come here, but they did. They had that entrepreneur spirit. But yeah, this was a very dangerous place to also come to. There wasn't much else. Yeah.
Are the legends of Betty Zane, in your opinion, are they true? Are they exaggerated?
This is funny because I will tell my students the story of a colic sleep and then Betty Zane's run, and then at the end I'm like, oh wait, I have no idea if this happened. And they're like, what did you just do to us? You can't do that. So, you know, the thing is they weren't writing things down during this era or documenting things as well as we might think they should have because they were trying to survive. So, I believe that like something like this happened. like something like this transpired, that there is truth to McCulloch's Leap and there is truth to Betty Zane's, famous gunpowder run, but that's kind of one of the things about being a historian, you have to weigh that option. So that's why I believe that these things, something like it happened. But it is kind of, again, it's a very teachable moment for them to have to realize that they can't pull up, Ebenezer Zane's Instagram and see like what happened. They don't understand that. They don't get it. So yeah.
Why is it Fort Henry, sir? Betty Zane?
So that's a great question too. So it's originally called Fort Fincastle. That was the original name. And then it was changed to Fort Henry because we, in this area, were for the American Revolution. We were patriots, and so it was named after Patrick Henry at that point. So that's the name that stuck. Yeah.
Why did they make that?
I don't know. So the gavel that I have from the Zane's cabin, that stays at home, but it's just nice I'm glad they did. It's nice to have a gavel. I take that one, and it's good to wake up kids, and wonder why you have it. I don't know, though. It's maybe something easy. Yeah. Someone tell, so he was, what was that? Someone's going to know here, I don't know. The royal governor of Virginia. So, probably because he helped fund it, maybe, so they named it after him, and then Patrick Henry, Fort Henry, that's what stuck, so. Those are good questions. Yeah. I don't know. There were a bunch of different tribes that moved through our area of the Iroquois Nation, but I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah, but that's a whole nother. That's a good class to have. Though, is on Native American culture and all the different tribes that lived here. Because here's the thing, as when you teach about this to students, you try to teach both sides, and no one ever really teaches it from the Native American point of view of what was happening to them and their culture, too. Yeah.
Have you read any of the books of St. Gray?
Yeah.
Because a lot of his books were about the history.
Yeah, so like a lot of you have heard of the famous author Zane Grey. He is a descendant of Betty Zane. I have, and that's one of the other things is if you're interested, because so many more people have written about the specific history of Betty Zane or the Zane family or a lot of these events, go to the Artisan Center, like River City. They have a huge selection of books from people that are way more educated about the history of that than I am. But yeah, he wrote specifically a novel, historical novel based on Betty Zane. Yeah. You're welcome. All right. Oh, there's one more. You got it.
Just a comment. My mother grew up about 3 blocks east of the old city county building, and she said those sidewalks were the best to roller skate on. Because a lot of the sidewalks were brick back then, but these were smooth, cement. And she said kids were down there every day, including herself.
It's funny how kids that's what they remember, the best sidewalk. The roller skate. Oh, there's one more.
My father worked in the city county building, and as a Girl Scout, I was almost a cookie princess because I could go through that building and sell cookies. 100 without a problem. But that was a beautiful, ornate building, and the woodwork was absolutely phenomenal.
And that's what I understand. So like the gavel and the box there, like for the alarm clock, that was specifically from the trim, the woodwork in there. And again, just as we're talking about this, it's the photo of the last city council meeting that happened at the city building, which I have to remember to take a picture of that and share that with you guys. It's kind of like a warm-up or a lesson about that building too. And you would recognize the city council members that were part of that era. A lot of you would remember their names from the wheeling games. All right, well, hey, I appreciate you guys coming back for another year of this. We have one more? Yeah.
Have you ever visited Betty Zane's burial?
So Betty Zane, she is buried in Walnut Grove Cemetery. She's buried in Martins Ferry along with Ebenezer and a lot of the Zanes from this era. And then you'll find the Zanes buried, I know, in Greenwood Cemetery and other cemeteries around too. But there's actually a very nice statue of Betty Zane there doing the gunpowder run. And yeah, she's buried in Martins Ferry.
That statue, my mother passed last year at the age of 101. She was there the day they dedicated that statue.
And
Great story.
I think it was school students who raised the money, if I'm not mistaken, because again, I showed that statue in class, and there's a plaque that says, school students raised the money for this. And this is like today, if you wanted to build that statue, you're talking $50,000 probably. You're talking a lot of money. But I always joke with my kids, I'm like, they raised money for this. Like, what are you doing? But yeah, that's an amazing story that she remembered that.
1928.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Thank Mr. Stanton. I get goosies, I get emotional seeing this many people in one place on a Saturday morning. And I am so excited, like nerdily excited for Haunted Wheeling on October 4th. I don't want to toot my own horn, but in 2002 I came in 4th place in the State Social Studies Fair. 6th grade doing Haunted History of Wheeling. That's when I peaked, my exciting moment in life. But I'm really excited. I think that's going to be a great presentation. Great into spooky season, and that's Ogilvy Fest weekend, I believe, as well. So that's a great wheeling weekend if you are willing to come spend it with us. And we hope to see you next month. Thank you again, Mr. Stanton.
Well, hey, thank you.